It really all started with, I suppose it started with the Amstrad 6128 with built-in disk drive that my dad bought when I was, I think 7 years old. And I got heavily into playing on the computer and kind of lost many hours to it, although no one else had an Amstrad, so it was impossible to get games for anyone else. But this interest in games continued throughout my teens, getting a Sega Mega Drive, and then PlayStation 1 all those years ago. They've just announced PlayStation 5. And at the same time, I was going through my education, got into art schools, started thinking about my relationship to the world and what I was going to make art about. And I realized that I was spending a lot of time still, not just in the physical world, but in the virtual world. And this virtual world was having an equal effect on me and how I saw the world as this physical world. So in the background, in my background here, you'll see this is the background from a fighting game called Tekken 2. I'm just going to share my screen here. Who can share? Okay, yes, fine. And this, where's he gone? This is how Tekken 2 normally looks. You have your combatants and you have the power bars, and you gradually whittle down each other's power bar until one of you falls to the ground, KO. And so I thought this is really interesting. This is like almost a sublime landscape in some ways. This mysterious forest. It's like a space for contemplation, and yet it's a space that's being used for fighting. So I thought this was back in 1999 on my BA course at Chelsea College of Art. I decided to erase all the background and just leave the not the background, erase all the foreground and leave just this forest environment and make that into a video. So you had, the video was just this eternally looping panning shot of this forest, because through manipulating the game, you could get lots of different views and you could make up the entire kind of 360 ring of it. So it became like a virtual environment in a way. So this was kind of, I guess, a start of me thinking about video games and art. And this was projected as a installation. You would enter the room and you'd see this projected into the wall, and it was like you were looking through into an alternative space. And there was this slippage between, what is this, a real space or is it a virtual space? It had this uncanny quality, kind of stepping between reality and construct. And I thought that was quite interesting. So that was called Ring. And that was picked up by a group show called New Contemporaries, which is a show that can be that you can apply to as a third year undergraduate or MA course person. And it started to be exhibited across various things. Video games continued to be part of how I saw myself as an artist, constructing myself through thinking about how I'm constructed through various elements of popular culture. So I was interested in hip hop, I was interested in soul music, I was interested in video games, and all of those things sort of combined into this character called the Barefoot Lone Pilgrim, who is a fictionalized version of myself, who would search for soul around the world, but that was embodied as soul music. So I'd be going to different record shops and picking up these things. But I just thought I'd include this image, because here you can see my Nintendo Advance console just in the top left-hand corner there. It was this was a diary that I took while I was a a hermit at Painshill Park in Surrey, reenacting the event when in the 1700s, the owner of Painshill Park employed a hermit to be in his kind of mocked up hermitage. So again, this idea of what is fantasy and what is reality for 7 years. But in the end, after 2 years, after 2 weeks, the this hermit was found drunk in a pub. So I thought I'd reenact that as a kind of it seemed like such a folly and such a strange sort of situation that it seemed interesting to re-enter into that space. Now, following on from creating the Barefoot Lone Pilgrim, I also created a whole cadre of other alter egos. Here you see the Barefoot Lone Pilgrim on the left, and the Orochi Pilgrim, the kind of Japanese samurai figure that I used in a Japanese garden in Tatton Park near Manchester. Again, looking at cultural appropriation in many ways. And I thought, as there was so many of these alter egos, yes, some others were Child of the Atom from the film, where I explored my relationship to Hiroshima with my daughter. My grandfather was a Japanese prisoner of war and always thought that he had been saved by the Hiroshima bomb. And this, made me deeply uncomfortable, but it was something I had to deal with. So there were and then of course there's David Blandy himself, this strange, semi-powerless artistic figure. And I could bring them all into this game. So here's, I made a fighting game where these different figures from performance art could meet in a fighting environment, like Street Fighter or Tekken or Mortal Kombat, all these fighting games that I'd become so intimately aware of while working in a video game shop for 2 years, where fighting games were our main method of conversation in many ways. Lunch breaks were taken improving skills and generally harassing people coming into the shop by making them play video games. And I wanted to play with that idea of what's at the heart of fighting games, which is that it's actually a duel with yourself in many ways, rather than a duel with another. You're trying to improve your own skills, and you're trying to find your own style, yourself in some ways through this sort of overtly aggressive act. And this took me through into thinking about these backgrounds again from games. So this is a background from Street Fighter 3, Elena stage, which has been repainted by my father, who is an artist, a landscape artist. And I decided to do a project with him, thinking about our backgrounds, our different approaches to art, but through the medium of these fighting game backgrounds. So I kind of shared with him a whole bunch of different backgrounds from games that I loved, and he redrew these. And then we entered into this space to have a conversation. So here you see my useful image of Edo 1600, Angin 1600, which is a film that I made looking at my relationship to Japan, because one of the things that was evident while I was working at the video game shop was how fetishized Japan was in the eyes of many gamers, because games came out there first. So lots of people bought import machines in order to take part in those games before anyone in this country was even aware of them. They also have far superior box art, and there was sort of a mystique around learning Japanese. so all of that combined with my own relationship, as I was saying before, with Hiroshima and my grandfather, and him being a Japanese prisoner of war, and being using his rice bowl that he kept from his Japanese prisoner of war camp, which was his daily ration, as his ashtray for the rest of his life, and kind of feeling very conflicted about this relationship to another culture, and the anxiety about kind of both exoticizing this other culture, but also being fascinated with it. So I thought about the first Englishman in Japan, who was William Adams, who was in the end named Anjin, became the founder of the Japanese Navy, the first foreign samurai, and kind of used his story as a sort of metaphor for a wider Western fascination, and kind of thinking about Zen and the idea of the self in many ways. But the reason I was going to show this clip, which seems impossible now, is that in the film I go over several of the kind of formative moments of computer game culture on myself, which is partly from things like Street Fighter. You have Ryu walking barefooted across the earth, searching for the perfect fight or the perfect moment almost. And then you also have the moment in Final Fantasy VII, incredible game by Squaresoft, which was really the first time that I realized that video games could have could have an emotional effect as well as kind of a visceral excitement. And it was the first video game to make me cry when, in kind of cliched fashion, it's when Aerith dies, which, spoiler alert, sorry about that, everyone who hasn't played the game. And yeah, it kind of made me think that maybe there was an emotional content inside video games that we could really deal with, that it wasn't just this kind of I don't know, there's often this split between low and high art, and which I've been, I suppose, fighting against or trying to push against through my whole career. But this is one of them, that you can't have kind of, I don't know, complete emotional experiences in the virtual space. And of course that's complete nonsense. You can experiencing the sublime inside a video game is much the same as experiencing the sublime in any other state. And this is one of the things that made me want to work with virtual reality, which I will try and show this one, which is in a film called The End of the World. And in The End of the World, I set up a 3D environment using Unity, which is a video game engine, kind of a space for making video games, mostly 3D video games, relatively easily. So I created a solar system and wanted to almost recreate that idea of a planetarium. I've been to a really good planetarium in Copenhagen, and I loved that that kind of that voice in your ear somehow, that is somehow kind of very intimate, because you're wearing these headphones and you're like inside this thing, and they're telling you about how the extremities of space, and kind of thought, how could you use that intimacy to talk about different sorts of experience? So I don't know, how we're experiencing the world, or different forms of trauma. So in the film, I talk about the trauma of a virtual world being destroyed, which is, there was a game called Asheron's Fall, which was an online game which ran for about 20 years. But in, I think it's 2017, 18, they shut the servers down, which meant that this game space, this space that was still shared by about, I think, 1,000, 2,000 users, even though it was really old, would not exist anymore. That all these things that they had been working towards, all these relationships that they'd forged in the virtual space would just disappear. And I thought this something kind of incredibly sad about that. And then at the same time, I was thinking about the global shift in politics, Trump coming to the White House, Brexit, this sort of political trauma that was going on, and how that was affecting me personally and intimately, but also just the simple trauma of grief, grief for the loss of people in your life. And so I was trying to mix all of those things in inside virtual reality, which so this is both a projected piece. You could see it in a gallery exhibition where it was projected on 3 walls, and it sort of surrounded you in that way. But it was also a virtual reality piece. You could put on a headset, and then my voice would be kind of ringing through your ears and kind of talking you through these shifts between different types of grief. It's kind of semi-poetic. I mean, you might get a sense of that if you could see any of the films. All of my films are available on my website and on Vimeo, so please do check them out after the talk. But yeah, all of these ones here, but I had some specially edited 3-minute versions, which I was hoping to show you. Yeah, and something quite particular about the virtual reality experience, the fact that you're inside that both the voice and somehow the visuals are inside your head, that you shift your eyes and you're actually looking around the scene. It creates an incredibly empathic environment. I mean, it's a space that I know has been used by companies to try and create extra empathy in potential donors, etc. But I thought it was an interesting space to explore for that very fact that it was somehow, it was almost like a personal performance, a one-to-one performance when someone was experiencing it. I think, in some ways that's a great drawback for VR, is the fact that you're enclosed off. But there is this kind of flip side that it can create a real intensity in your experience or something. I thought I'd just talk about briefly now how I came to be working with Larry Achampong, and one of the main things that brought us together, along with hip hop, really was through a hip hop work that we got talking somewhere. Oh wow, this one actually works. So let's try and watch this from the beginning. This is a section of Finding Fanon 2 from 2015. Oh no, no, it doesn't work. No, it just had a little blast of music. So here you see Larry and I inside the Grand Theft Auto 5 game engine. We started working together in performance. We created a hip hop performance where we were biters stealing beats and rhymes from the history of hip hop, thinking about cultural appropriation, who has the right to say things, but also taking this, I guess, street art form into white cube gallery spaces and kind of as a confrontation in some ways. But then, yeah, we were spending a lot of time together. We were talking about games. We were talking about, our shared love of Zelda and Metal Gear Solid. And we wanted to somehow bring our interest in the virtual into our practice, our collective practice. And Grand Theft Auto 5 was a great way to do that. Here was a game that was not only built for making machinima. It has a whole game video editing mode inside it where you can move cameras around and set up scenes. But it also it's a space, a found space. You know, I mean, we both come from a sculpture background, and we've both used found objects in our work, things that are just exist in the world, and you're recontextualizing them for an art space. But here was a found object which talks about violence, and we were trying to talk about societal violence, systemic racism, which is at the center of our series, the Finding Fanon series. This is Finding Fanon 2. This is where we enter into Grand Theft Auto, and we search for something for Fanon. Really, that's the name of the work, Finding Fanon. So we're searching for this the philosopher Frantz Fanon in Grand Theft Auto, thinking about the virtuality of the space, the way that the whole space is governed by algorithms, and how race and racial identity enter even into the virtual space, even though for many years it was seen as a potential tabula rasa, a kind of a spare space that you could somehow become anyone you want in it. Somehow the issues of society still enter into the virtual. And how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the fact that we can never escape who we are, and we can't escape these past relationships and that history? How do we form some sort of new future? So that was Finding Fanon 2. And alongside, after our experiment in Finding Fanon 2 for making a whole film inside Grand Theft Auto, we realized that we had a whole tool set for making work, which could give voice to other people, to people who wouldn't necessarily, their voices wouldn't normally be heard, to the marginalized, to people who don't have access to this equipment, but have important stories to tell. So the first people we worked with were veterans, war veterans who were in the criminal justice system. So there's since being at war, they'd gone into prison, and we conducted a whole series of workshops with them inside prison, and also their families outside, and they all made their own films using this space. So we were able to get a PlayStation 4 inside the prison, and they were able to choose their avatars and go on journeys inside this space, and then couple that with conversations about where they were, where they wanted to be. But we didn't prescribe anything. It just became like, some of them were poems, some of them were songs, some of them were simple statements, but they all kind of came together into this body of work, and we called it FF Gaydon. So Finding Fanon Gaydon side story, which is a kind of a common thing in Japanese pop culture. I'm just going to try and share this one. So this is another one, Finding Fanon Delete.
I came here 11 years ago. I stayed in the reception center for 3 years without any answer. But they gave me a work permit. So I was working as a cleaner, and after 3 years my application was rejected. They gave me a lawyer, and I applied again, and was denied. I waited a long time and received no answer. My work permit expired and my employer asked me to renew it. When I applied for the permit, I was told that there was a final decision, rejection. They forgot me for 3 years, and then again for another year, and only when I applied for the work permit did they remember me sending the decision of rejection. After the second rejection, my employer didn't want me to work there, as I didn't have a permit. After the last rejection, they said I had to leave this country, and I couldn't work. I survived 1 year on the money I had saved from working before. After a year, I couldn't afford rent, so I started to live with friends and my network. I'm afraid to go back to my country. I have been politically active. I want to see democracy in Ethiopia. Supporting an organization for a political party puts me in danger. Because of this, I am afraid to return to Ethiopia. And now, everyone is afraid of being sent by force to Ethiopia. Politicians are selling us for their purposes. Innocent people are being tortured and killed. So many people are in prison. They have no rights of speech. We are afraid of what will happen if we go back. I survived to get to Europe. Why do they want to send us back to this place? I am a woman and I am morally tortured. Instead of having a life, a family, children, I have nothing. I cannot marry. I cannot have children. I've stayed here for a long time and now I can't work. I am a woman whose age is running away. It is hopeless. No one will marry you if you are dependent on someone. No one wants you. It's a bad feeling.
Okay, so that was Finding Fan on Gaydon Delete. It was made in Oslo with people in limbo, Meniske Limbo. And it was 3 members of that organization telling their story. They were in a very difficult situation, so they needed not only the mask of being shown through an avatar in Grand Theft Auto, but also the mask of using a computer voice. So this is the one of the Macintosh computer voices, Vicky, standing in for Werkatu's voice. So that is a small section of the film. There are 3 stories in the film. It's half an hour long, but that was the first of them. And I think it became an important work for Larry and I, because it really showed the potential for the virtual to be a space for catharsis in some ways, and also for the potential for political change, for changing people's minds about certain situations. So I realize I'm coming up to the end of my talk. I'm sorry I wasn't able to show you more videos, but hopefully I've given you a sense of where my work comes from, and the potentials of game engines and virtuality to make artworks. And I'd welcome any questions. Thank you very much.